In 2011, Josh and Amber Hilberling's violent marriage ended in a sudden death. Was it an accident during a fight, or was it more than that? I'm Charlie Worrell,
And I'm Eric Carter Lundeen.
and this is Crime Lines and Consequences. Hello, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Charlie?
I'm good. I'm really excited because we have a special guest here with us today. We have Bob from the Defense Diaries, and you may know him from everybody's YouTube channel that he goes on.
What's up, guys?
How are you?
You are a highly coveted guest, and we're glad we were able to get you on the show.
I would throw other people out of the way to be on the show with you guys. Like no one trumps you guys ever. You know that.
Aw,
I was
that's so
asking you, I'm
sweet.
like, seems like you've had 5 or 6 people on. I'm like, you guys like to give me a complex. You're like, you'll get your chance.
We
So
need to
yeah,
keep you waiting. Yeah.
I like that. I like that. So I'm excited to be with you guys. I miss you both too. So there's
Oh, I
that.
miss you
Yeah.
too.
It's nice to be able to hang out a little bit, even if it is just online.
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
we'll be seeing you in July for the True Crime Podcast Festival.
Love it. So excited. It's gonna be a banger. This is gonna be a good one. Got a
It
lot
is.
of got a lot of big names coming in this season for a
Mhm.
lot of awesome stuff. I mean, you saw Julie Murray's crushing number
Oh my
1 across
goodness.
the boards with her new
On day
drop
one.
on day 1.
Amazing. Amazing.
Amazing.
So
It
Amazing
gives me
amazing.
stuff.
s gives me so much hope for that,
It's amazing.
the change in true crime that's coming, I think.
It's
It's really
amazing.
awesome to watch, yeah.
It really is. It's such a great concept, in terms of
Mhm.
kind of what Sarah's, trying to get out there, where it's get the story from the victims or the victims' families.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
what's a better source than that? Like, honestly, if people are willing enough to open up about it, I mean, you're just not going to get a more genuine source than that.
Mhm.
You can't, so yeah, no, I'm excited.
And
Yeah, and that podcast is called Media Pressure if anyone's interested.
I think it goes back to like the humanization of true crime, and I think that's what makes this podcast super special. Like I got to listen to the first episode. I need to listen to the second one, but just really getting to understand Maura as a person, as a
Yeah,
sister, and as a daughter. Like it's such a beautiful tribute to her. So
it really is.
congratulations to Sarah and to Julie and VFJ Media. But I think we've had enough small talk, Charlie.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get into this case. Bob and I actually presented this case together at a true crime podcast festival, not this last year, but the year before. And we had a pretty captivated audience with this. They were really engaged in the conversation around it. And so we hope our listeners, I know you're listening to this whole thing, you can't ask questions in between, but if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them on social media. So we are going to start with Amber and Josh Hilberling. We will be showing some crime scene photos in this, but nothing is graphic. So don't worry about that. There's no blood, there's no body, nothing even close to that. One time I was at a true crime event and I went to a lecture on BTK. And halfway through the slides, she clicks on one and it is a graphic crime scene photo. And if you know anything about BTK, bind, torture, kill,
Mm,
you just imagine what that picture looked like.
unsettling.
Unsettling
Mhm.
to say the least. And there was no warning. And again, as Eric is talking about the humanization of true crime, we would not put up pictures that would separate us from that. But there are some pictures we will be showing just so you understand what happened a little better.
And if you're listening and not watching, you can either go to YouTube to watch, or we'll go ahead and upload those photos to Instagram and Facebook
Mhm.
for those of you that want to see them.
That's right. It's a little hard to do the dual audio video format, but we're trying to reach everybody. So we are lucky to have Bob here. The reason Bob and I presented this together was that I did the research on the case, and then he was able to chime in and give a lot of insight on the details. So Eric and I are going to cover the backstory first, and then Bob will chime in as we need him. So we're going to talk about Amber and Josh Hilberling, who had a short courtship before they got married. He was about 22 and she was not quite 19 when they got married. I feel like this is a theme this month in our episodes, Eric. People getting married
Yeah,
young. Bob, how old were
definitely.
you when you got married?
First time 25, and then I think I was 32 when I got
Mhm.
out of law school, and then we courted, Alice and I. We met in law school, so then we courted for a bit, to use an old-timey term. And then we got hitched in 2006. So I think
Okay.
at that point I was older. I was old enough to know better than to get married at 22. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
young. That's
Hmm.
young. I think that the age, which I tell my adult children, which our oldest, Courtney, like, took that thing to the bank. I said 30. 30 is when you should get married. Sow your wild oats, date, do what you need to do, figure all your stuff out. And then 30, it's a perfect time. It's
Hmm.
like,
Mhm.
I guess the rub is, if you're going to get married later, you're going to have kids later, which means you're going to be parenting later. But any parent knows you're never done parenting anyway. So you're always parenting. It doesn't matter if they're 18 plus, you still have to parent, as you're always a
That's
parent.
that's very true. Or you could do what I did. Get married young, have kids young, stay married, and then have kids when you're older so that you have a 25-year-old and a 6-year-old at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, we're not too far off. Courtney's 30 and Scarlett's 11. So there
Yeah.
was phase one, because Allie had two when she was very young. She was 19 when she had court. Like, so she was very, very young.
That's how
And
old I
then,
was when I had my first, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, but it worked out, and it's good. Like, if we need to go to Jam Cruise, Courtney comes and stays with Scarlett and Cameron, and
Mhm.
we're good. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's the best thing about having older kids is the babysitting. That's how Lars and I go to
Clutch.
events.
It's
We
huge.
leave we leave the little ones with the big kids.
Yeah, it's huge.
So,
It's a real perk.
yeah. Well, Eric and I had talked about getting married young in our last episode because it also
Hmm.
applied. I don't wanna say there's a pattern here, but let's keep going.
Yep.
After they got married, and one of the reasons they married young and so quickly is that Josh was in the service, and anyone who's in the service knows you can't have someone just live with you on
Hmm.
base or in your barrack, obviously. So unless you get married. So they got married and moved to Alaska, and Josh was stationed in Fairbanks. While they were in Fairbanks, the police were called to their home repeatedly from around January of 2011 until May of 2011 for intimate partner violence pretty much every time. And they'd both been taken to the station at various times. Like sometimes it would be her, sometimes it would be him. It doesn't appear that charges were pursued on either of them. The calls in Alaska ended in May of 2011 because they moved to Tulsa. Josh was discharged. I believe his discharge was a general one, but under reasons it said drug use.
Mm.
So when they moved to Tulsa, they lived with Amber's family for a little while. Within 2 weeks of getting to Tulsa, Josh filed a restraining order against Amber, but then neither showed up for the hearing. So if they had any separation, it was short lived. The complaints of the abuse that were in the order were all things that had happened while they were in Alaska. And then soon after that, they moved into an apartment that family members owned in downtown Tulsa.
So neither of them were working and they had a baby on the way, but Josh was heading out of town with friends on a trip to Tennessee in June of 2011. They were arguing about the trip. Josh said that they could afford it, but Amber said that they couldn't. Amber suspected that he was going there to sell drugs.
So obviously, she wasn't a fan of him going there to sell drugs, especially if that's his explanation for how he could afford to go there. Um, one of the
So
arguments,
wait. So his plan was, he was just going to sell drugs in order to fund a vacation. So it wasn't.
and also she basically told him at some point, if you buy a crib for the baby we have on the way, then you can go. And he said, well, when I go, I'll come back and I'll have money for the crib. And that's kind of where the drug selling comes up.
Oh, so
This
yeah,
is according to her. We only have one account of the exact argument.
right.
On June 7th, they woke up and started arguing right away. This is, I don't, Lars and I aren't big arguers in general. We tend to resolve things quickly, but this is one of those couples where their arguments will just kind of bleed over into the next day and the next day, and it's all just one continuous argument.
Yeah.
So they went to bed fighting and they woke up fighting. A neighbor did overhear some of this arguing, and according to this witness, a male voice said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And then a female voice yelled back, "I want you to grow up." During this fight, Josh picked up a laundry basket and he threw it. It doesn't sound like he threw it at Amber, but it did hit a small bedroom window, and that window broke. So Amber went ahead and called maintenance to ask about getting it repaired.
And by luck, or maybe because this apartment just had really crappy windows that they and needed a glass repairman all the time, they already had two people on site working on another apartment, so they were able to come by pretty much right away and fix it.
Both Amber and Josh were visibly upset when the workmen arrived, to the point that one of the men said later that he was worried because of this tension between Amber and Josh. It was so elevated, and there seemed to be an aggression in his view coming from Josh. Josh was a big guy at 6'4", 220 pounds, while Amber was nearly a foot shorter and she was visibly pregnant. So he was worried that this might escalate into something physical. While he was working in the bedroom, he heard a loud crash and then screaming coming from the living room. So his worry was that this arguing had turned physical, so he ran in there to intervene. When he got in there, no one was in the room. The window was broken and the front door was open. Amber was in the hall. She was trying to get into the elevator to get help.
Unfortunately, Josh had fallen from the 25th floor to the 8th floor roof of the parking garage.
Okay, so this where that red mark is, that's just showing
Is that where he
um
fell out of?
yeah, he fell out of there and you can see the parking structure behind, that's what he landed on. And then the
Mhm.
broken window. So this is what our viewers are seeing is how high it was and also the broken window. Now this is an exterior window in a high rise, and I think you can see how thin that glass looks.
Yeah.
It's not that the frame popped out, the glass actually broke, which I think is important
Mhm.
to see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a critical fact, you know?
Right.
I mean, it's definitely gonna be one of the things we'll be talking about.
Yeah, so Amber ran down there, she kept yelling for someone to help him. He was obviously already dead. He had fallen onto that parking garage. When EMS arrived, they couldn't help Josh, but they were trying to calm Amber down, who was panicking, and she was taken to the police station for questioning. She was very upset, and they let her grandmother into the interrogation room with her while they were typing up a report in the other room. So they were just sitting in there. Her grandmother was there, so Amber started talking to her grandmother. One of the officers overheard a few snippets of what Amber was saying and decided to go ahead and press record on the AV equipment in the room.
Of course he did.
Amber was incredibly emotional, calling herself a horrible person for pushing Josh out of the window. Her grandmother told her to stop saying that. She asked if she pushed him intentionally. Amber said, of course she didn't. Her grandmother then told her not to say anything else without an attorney.
Smart.
Which is very good advice from grandma.
Mhm.
Amber did say, "I wonder if his parents know yet." They were right. They kept saying, "If we stay together, I'm going to kill him." After recording Amber and Gloria for a while, the police asked Amber if she was willing to make a formal statement. And she said that her mother was sending an attorney over. And after he came, Amber did make her statement. But before we get into what Amber said happened, Bob, I want to know, what are your thoughts on them hitting record while she was talking to her grandmother?
I mean, she's in the station. She probably has a pretty good idea it's a recorded room. Grandma certainly had a good idea that it was a recorded room. You know, I mean, is it shady? Yeah, but in terms of law enforcement, was it illegal? No. You don't have a expectation of privacy in that room. And, I mean, it's my number one It's my number one rule for clients. Shut up. You don't talk. Don't talk. Don't talk to the police. Don't talk when you're in a interrogation room. I mean, anybody that watches any kind of true crime content knows that the first thing that they do is that they leave you in the room alone for an extended period of time. See if you
Mhm.
start talking to yourself. Oh my God, I can't believe what I did. Just any of those kind of things going on. So in terms of would I have tried to suppress it? Yes. Would I have been successful? No. But I mean, the lesson to be learned is, but everything's about context in this case,
Mhm.
and in terms of when she's saying, "Oh, I can't believe I pushed him through the window," that doesn't go to intent.
Mhm.
I mean, whatever may have happened, whatever physical interaction took place, and if the end result was him actually tripping and falling out, which was what she claims, I
Mhm.
mean, it's hard to dispute it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Especially because of the size differential, which I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll get into. But yeah, I like that whole. It's kind of par for the course. But I'm a defense attorney, so I always,
So you gotta try to get this kicked out, but
yeah, for
how
sure.
far outside of the station, let's say I get arrested, how far outside of the station do I get my expectation of privacy? Like, do I have to be in my car driving away? Like, if I'm standing outside the police station,
Yeah,
are
you
they
have
catching me
to.
on cameras?
At least in your vehicle, which is
Okay.
still nothing like your home.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Vehicles, you have some expectation of privacy, not as much as in your home, though. Like your
Right.
home, like,
Mm.
you're the queen of the castle there. Like you have an expectation of privacy that trumps everywhere else. Like
Mhm.
anywhere in public, you have no expectation of privacy. If you're out blabbing in a restaurant and they have an
Mhm.
overhear going on you, like they don't even necessarily need a warrant for that. So,
Right.
because you have zero expectation of privacy there. And when you go into a police station, you're not going to have any expectation of privacy in there. You have to assume that they're
Mhm.
recording everything, and you should for
Mhm.
all of
Yeah.
our listeners out there that are intending on committing crimes. If you get
Well,
arrested,
first of all, don't commit crimes. And
exactly.
then
That's our
but
that's
if
our
you
sage advice.
But if you're
yeah, but
wrongfully accused, then don't
yeah,
talk.
And get a
yeah.
lawyer. Always get
Get
a
a
lawyer,
lawyer.
especially if you're wrongfully accused. Like
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
have a like people have a it's a misnomer. People are like, "Oh, if I'm innocent, what do I need a lawyer for?" I'm like, "That's when you need a
You need
lawyer
one the most.
most."
Yeah.
Because if they've brought you in as an innocent person and they're questioning you, like above and beyond like initial statements, if they've like called you back in and they're wanting to talk to you and you didn't do it, you need to know they're looking at you. And if
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
looking at you need to have a lawyer, especially if you didn't do it, because
Right.
that is how it's like that American Nightmare. Charlie, no, I know you don't watch any TV, but Eric, did you happen to see any of that thing?
In my
It,
spare
it's
time, I don't have
uh,
any.
it's crazy. It's a crazy story. It's like I'm
Yeah.
sure it was kind of the number one thing on Netflix for like 2 weeks, and it
I
was
did
it was
hear about it, so I do know the basic plot.
yeah, insane story. But
Mhm.
the bigger story about that was that women not being believed,
Right.
and it's like, police not believing women in terms of saying that they've been sexually assaulted has been a
Mhm.
chronic problem forever, and
Yep.
it's still like that case was pretty recent, still goes on, which is insane. Thank God there was a female cop,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Because like all the
Mhm.
male cops are like, I don't know, it's a bad look for the popo.
Yeah. There's a I won't get we're gonna get way too off topic if I start bringing up Nome, Alaska, but okay, so let's get back on to
I'm here for it though. I'll just tell you that right now. I love tangents.
I know. Yeah, we should have you on our small talk Patreon stuff because that's all that is
Mhm.
tangents.
I will tangent the hell out of that thing.
They're usually only 25 minutes long, but I bet
Oh,
if you were on, we could get it to an hour.
oh, easy, easy,
Probably 2 hours.
easy, easy. Yeah, dude, like Eric, when you and I record, we go a long time, dude.
We
Mhm.
do.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 2-hour marathon.
Yep.
Just because we're floating all over the place, but
Yeah,
we always hit the key points. So
We do. We get
and
there.
that's what
yeah,
matters.
indeed.
So, let's get into what Amber told the police happened. She said that they were arguing all morning and they were standing about 2 to 3 feet from the window. She said that Josh grabbed her shoulders and, fearing that he was about to assault her, she pushed him. Josh went backwards, and there are some questions on if he possibly tripped on something as he got pushed back. So let me bring up a picture of the living room for you to see. So you can see the window he went out is the one all the way on the left. And there are some candles there. There's the edge of a TV stand you can see.
Hmm.
But for the most part, what would he have tripped on? Like, I feel the TV stand's too far away, but then the candlesticks would have been knocked over if he tripped on them. He was 6'4".
Wait, so what about that red chair? Like,
They were on the that was on the other side of him.
how do we
So
know? Is that because that's what her
that
story is?
this is according to Amber's story, and then, like, they were right in front of the window, like 2 to 3 feet, and he went straight back, not, like, at an angle. Like, she's not saying she was standing near the coffee table. So, the where she said he was standing was kinda to the side of the coffee table.
What about that big puffy
I
pillow?
was gonna
Like, what
ask
happened
that.
if that pillow's, like, on the floor and he's walking backwards? I mean, he could certainly lose his step, and he's a big dude.
Yeah,
6'4", if you're losing your step and you've
Mhm.
got, crepe paper type glass
Right.
where, there's not gonna be any resistance and he, just falls through. Yeah, I don't like, I mean, that could definitely happen. That's a big pillow.
that pillow's in a weird spot too. Like
It
I almost
is
feel like it belonged on the chair or the couch or something. I feel like it was placed there or moved there.
after the
Like
fact.
that's a weird place to put a pillow. Why would you have a pillow in the
Super weird.
corner by the window?
Makes no
It
sense.
is a weird place for a pillow, and if you look on the red chair to the side of it, it looks like a pillow fell off of that chair as well. So, like Bob's saying, maybe he knocked into the chair. Based on Amber's story and where they were aligned, that wouldn't be, but the pillow is off the chair, so maybe he did try to grab the chair and shook it a little or something.
Mhm.
I don't know. That
But
pillow
what's
did fall off.
interesting is look at how close those candle holders are. Like,
Mhm.
if this was any kind of real struggle, like, in that small area, because if you're looking at the picture on the left, you get kind of a better idea of scale.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, there is not much room to struggle in there. You
No.
know what I mean? Like, if it's a real heated battle, like, you
You'd
would
be
have
bumping
thought.
into things.
Exactly. Well, you'd be knocking those are big, just like candlesticks, right? Those 3 things right there?
Yeah,
Mhm.
and they're super thin, yeah.
Super thin. Like, how are those not upended? I don't
Mhm.
understand it. Yeah, that's strange.
Yeah, so the crime scene didn't necessarily give Amber much of a defense there. That but it's still the questions of, did he trip? Or if you get pushed, sometimes you just lose your footing, right? You're
Mhm.
not necessarily going to trip over something if she shoved him hard enough. He did hit the window, which, as we saw in the picture, then shattered. The police did not believe Amber's story that Josh was holding her by the shoulders when he was pushed because, for one thing, at the scene, Amber was hysterically telling people what happened and never said Josh had put his hands on her first.
That's interesting. Josh was also very large and military trained, so if he was close enough to have Amber by the shoulders, how did she get enough leverage to push him hard enough to make him stumble back to the point which he fell through the window?
That pillow.
Well, Bob's
I
gonna blame the pillow.
I mean, I think the
That's
pillow
our
was on
owl
the
did it.
ground and she,
Mhm.
because I mean, Allison's pretty diminutive and Amber was not a like a large lady either,
Mhm.
even pregnant, like, we're talking about a guy who's 6'4", and
Mhm.
like Eric said, military trained. It's like there must have been something that put him off balance. Like, even if she just gave him a little shove, because I'm just envisioning this is a couple that's physical.
Mm.
They're physical with each other. It's obviously been something that has gone on throughout the course of their entire relationship. And, like, typically when couples start out like that and they don't do anything about it, say go to couples counseling or try to get some kind of counseling to figure out what the source of this anger is that's manifesting itself in physical violence, then it's going to continue, and it's kind of like how they lived. Like I would call it like a negative dependency that they had on one another. They both put hands on each other, and and I see it all the time. Like I've handled, probably like in the scope of cases that we handle most frequently, domestic violence is probably the number one case. There's just tons of them. We represent women, and they go both ways. It's women, men,
Mhm.
and a lot of times it's like you don't get the DVs where, you get the battered woman where her entire face is beaten up. It's typically he grabbed my phone. I grabbed his arm. I clawed him. You know what I'm saying? It's always like a lot of hand fighting type stuff. But, frankly, all it takes is a mark. Like if
Mhm.
somebody gets pissed off, calls law enforcement, and you involve them in your lives, somebody's going to jail. One of the two of you is going to jail if you call that in, no matter how violent or not violent it was. Because obviously, when an hour and a half passes and the cops have you separated and they're talking to one of the couple in one room and the other of the couple in another room, separated, they're each getting their side of the story, they're checking for marks, and then somebody's getting in custody, and you're always having the other one saying, well, I don't want them arrested. Like, and I'm not talking about a situation where somebody is just like truly beaten.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about like a physical, where the couple's just pushing each other. They've gotten aggressive, which is pretty frequent, frankly.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not advisable, certainly, but it happens all the time. And it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of where it probably needs to go to domestic violence court, but somebody's going to get arrested, and then because they just don't leave. Like what, like in
Mhm.
it's in with DV cases, law enforcement has the opportunity to move forward on a case, even if the victim is not a willing participant anymore, saying, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to press charges. The states can say, well, and you understand the reasoning behind that. For years, women were just being battered. There was no recourse. Cops
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't do anything about it. There were no domestic violent acts in like anywhere, statutorily speaking. And so women had no ability. Like, can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? You have
I
somebody that has economic control over you and
I can't
physical
imagine.
dominion. Oh,
Yeah.
dude, it's like it's
Bear,
brutal.
Yeah, that was my
bear
life.
witnessed it.
That was my life. That's what I grew up in. Watching that happen every day, and then watching the cops laugh and leave like
Yeah,
nothing mattered.
yeah.
So it's definitely, it sounds like this couple was very violent with each other, or they were at least used to putting, like you said, their hands on each other. But I'm still, even with the pillow, I don't know. It just seems interesting to just think about how she could have done that, especially if, like she said, he had his hands on her shoulders. Like, I just don't see that being possible.
Unless it's like a situation where like he's got his hands on her shoulders. Because the one thing that we don't hear is that just prior to him hearing the window breaking, like, and when I'm talking about the maintenance man, you don't
Mm-hmm.
hear him talking about like screaming or
Yep.
yelling just prior to that. So they're cognizant of the fact that they've got a maintenance man in the apartment. They're
Mhm.
probably, they were in the middle of a bickering match, so he's coming in. They're probably trying to keep it down to a
Mm-hmm.
certain extent. And, I mean, you get one of those situations where, he's got his hands on her shoulders saying, look, this is going to be fine, like kind of like condescending her. She's getting more irritated by it. And like just a thing like where she like knocks his hands off and gives him like a shove. You know what I mean? And like not like a huge, and she's diminutive, like I 6'4". I mean, like if you've never been around a guy that's 6'4", that's a big dude. They're
Mhm.
they're hard to move, and like I just think it's plausible that there was something, or maybe his foot even gets caught in the carpet. I mean, who
Yeah,
knows?
or the
You
rug.
know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Yeah, if he's got his
Mm-hmm.
sneakers on or whatever, it's like I don't like her intent. I feel very confident about. and I can't wait to hear what the verdict is here, or if she pleads out. But I don't ever think her intent was to push him through the window to his death.
Mm.
Well, we wouldn't be talking about this if the police believed you, Bob. They do not side with you. Do you wanna hear what the police how the police pieced together what happened is that they do not believe he was the aggressor. Their theory is that Amber likely caught Josh off guard with the shove, which is how he was off balance enough to go through the window. Shortly before this, he was texting a friend who was supposed to be coming to pick him up so he could leave the apartment that day. So what the police think happened was he was looking out the window, waiting on his ride, when Amber got mad, came up from behind, and shoved him.
Oh, please. Looking out of it. All right. Can you pull up? For our
I'll pull up the
viewers,
let
can we
me
pull up the building again?
yes.
He's looking out the window. From what floor is that?
What floor were they on?
It
It's on my
looks
notes.
high. It looks
They were high, and because that the where that car is parked, that's the top of the parking garage, that's the 8th floor.
okay. Well, how would
So
this guy see his ride? Are
so
they
yeah,
trying to tell me that the ride would drive into the parking structure and
to
go
the
around
top
that?
of it.
Oh, get out of here. What a
So he
half-baked theory.
yeah, they were on the 25th floor, and the roof of the parking garage is the 8th floor.
Wow. Officer
So
Friendly coming up with a great theory. Well, I think he was looking out the window, waiting for his friends to arrive, and just waiting for the car to pull up on that structure. And then he was gonna have to come on. No one's sitting there looking out the window. What is the guy, like a 6-year-old waiting for his
waiting
his
for
his
his
divorced
ride.
father who's coming for visitation? Daddy, are you here yet? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. It sounds like a lot of malarkey.
Well, the police believed their theory, and they arrested Amber. She was initially charged with first-degree murder, but then they dropped it down to second degree because that's basically the most they felt they could prove because it's unlikely she intended for Josh to die, and that is a requirement for first-degree murder in Oklahoma under these circumstances. The only exception to intent is in child abuse cases. Those are first-degree murder, not just as felony murder, but like they're in the statute, first-degree murder includes murder by child abuse.
Yeah.
So in this case, she would have had to intend for him to die for it to be first degree, and they don't believe that. They do believe she intended to push him and that it was not self-defense.
Isn't there a foreseeability aspect of second degree though? Like wouldn't she had because it's one like there's no intent for her to kill him. You know what I'm saying? Like, isn't there a foreseeability aspect to
Look at me, I'm all prepared from our presentation we did
love it?
2 years ago. But so in Oklahoma, second degree murder is that the act that caused the death was imminently dangerous, and the conduct evinced a depraved mind in extreme disregard for human life. So, extreme disregard for human life, pushing someone while they're standing in a window is apparently what they're saying was. I personally would think a 25th story window would be really reinforced.
Should be.
Yeah.
I
Should be.
Well,
actually think my main floor windows, if I pushed someone into my main floor windows, I would not expect them to go out the window. I
well,
wouldn't think that's a disregard for human life.
yeah, plus I mean, I saw when I was doing a little research to refresh on the case, that sued. They sued
Yes.
building in
Mhm.
order to, saying, look, like you're not up to code with these windows. These windows are ridiculous
Right.
for a
Which
high rise.
which they were not up to code at all.
Right. I mean, imagine like families that have
Mhm.
kids,
Right.
like that's scary. That's a
Yeah.
scary concept. Like I'm still not seeing it in terms of, depraved mind. Like they're in the middle of a little beef. Like it has to be their story. Their story has to be that he's facing away from her, looking out the window with his nose on the window and his hands up there,
Mm.
waiting for his buddies to get there. And she just comes like a little bull and smashes into him, and he goes flying through. I mean, that's the only way that it fits under that statute, because if it's them in a little spat, and like what we
Mhm.
were talking about, he's got his hands on his shoulders. She's like, "Get your hands off me," and gives him a little shove. He loses his bat. She's clearly not trying to push him through the window.
Mhm.
But he's a
Yeah.
big hulking dude. Like if a big
Mhm.
hulking guy loses his balance, he's flailing arms, like taking a step back. And like you said, you've got a window that's not reinforced, that's like
Mhm.
paper thin. As soon as he makes contact, it's giving way and he's going
Mhm.
out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know. It's tough. I can't wait to see what happens in court. She must have a good lawyer. She gets off, right? Tell me she gets off.
Well, you're gonna have to stay tuned to find out. So,
Oh.
Amber continued to insist that the push was self-defense, and that is what she was going to argue at trial, that this was a case of self-defense.
But the prosecution was prepared to take Amber to trial on second-degree murder charges, but they were also willing to make a deal. The first deal that the state offered would have meant 7 years in prison with 13 years suspended. Amber said no. Then, right before the trial, they tried again. This time, it would be 5 years in prison with 15 years probation. The deals kept getting better and better. So, Bob, what does it
Mhm.
tell you if the state gives your client these offers?
Well, I mean, the obvious thought is that, she's adamant about her innocence and that she's not going to plead out to anything that she didn't intend on doing and didn't do. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the first thing that hits your mind. But, as an attorney, then I'm sitting there telling her, okay, I understand. I understand that you didn't do this purposefully. However, this is where we're at. I mean, we're on the precipice of trial. They're coming with their story. We have no way to refute it other than your own testimony. It's a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. That's where you're comparing. Look, if you go down on this thing, the sentence could be 5 times that. It's one of those situations where, you know, people plead out on this stuff all the time because of the fear of the end game if you go to trial and lose for crimes that you haven't even committed. Like, if they have a strong case, it's like like basically like an Alford plea situation where, like, look, I get that the state has evidence that if they present it, I could definitely get convicted on it. However, I'm telling you I didn't do it. You know what I mean? It's that same
Mhm.
concept. So it's a really tough thing, and ultimately it's the client. It's their choice. They get to decide. You just have to give them the options. But, like, think about that. She's adamant. Like, there's no way I'm not taking any plea deal. I'm going to trial. I'll take my chances at trial. The people will believe me. The guy was 6'4". Who's going to believe that my little ass pushed him through a window? I mean, that I'm
Mhm.
sure that's what the conversation was. And you just have to keep going back as the attorney and say, look, I get it. I really do. However, I'd be remiss and not doing my job if I didn't warn you. Look, they could win this at trial. If the jury doesn't believe you, you're done. They're gonna get this is a she said. There is no other side to this.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
it's a really tough situation. And, it's like one of the worst spots to be in because I'm sure that the attorney was like, I believe you. I don't
Mhm.
think for 1 second, like, I don't even represent her and I believe her. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, the story doesn't make sense to me. Like, that there was this, him gazing out the window looking for his buddies and she's like running up behind him. There, the lack of argument or loud noises or signs of a struggle or sounds of a struggle just prior to is perplexing,
Mhm.
because, like, if that's going on, then it seems a little more plausible that maybe
Mhm.
something happened. Even if he's facing her and he's like got his back right to the window and she gives him a really good shove, but then her momentum's probably taking her, if, like, he's going through the window, like,
Mhm.
if she's put all her force and all of her momentum moving forward into him with the power she would need to be able to move him, she's probably going out the window with him. You know what I mean? Like, because she would have to get that close because
Mhm.
she's a little thing.
Yeah.
She's just not, so
Hmm.
that's 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 one of the tougher parts of being a defense attorney is like that kind of conversation right there because what do you do? I mean, all you can
Mhm.
do is and if your client's adamant, Again, just like it's their choice whether or not to take a plea. It's their choice whether or not they want to go to trial. And if they say, let's go to trial, you're going to trial. That's it. And you're going to do your best to try to convince the jury that it's the way that she said it went down. It's a tough spot.
I would have taken the 5 years. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I'm a not a very risky person.
Me neither. I'm risk adverse.
Same.
I'd be like, 5 years sounds great.
It's
I could do it.
hard though. It's hard. Like if
I think it's also complicated. We have to remember that Amber was having a baby.
yes,
So
that's
5
what I'm
years would be
saying.
5 years away from her baby. In those first 5 years, which we know as parents are so important.
Yeah.
And she didn't kill the guy. She did
Right.
not murder this dude. Like that's the part that you always have to factor in. It's easy to sit here when we're, pontificating about it and say, I'd take the 5 years. It's an entirely different thing when you're sitting in the situation. She's pregnant, she's having a baby, and she didn't intentionally kill him. Like that's what I'm saying. Like the weight of that decision is so heavy.
Impossible.
It really is. It's like, what do? I plead out and I lose 5 years of life with my child, raising my kid for something I didn't do, or I roll the dice. But man,
plus,
that downside.
You have to consider too, like your life after that is like you are now a convicted felon.
Yeah.
So like
you're a convicted murderer because they weren't giving her a deal on the charges from what I remember. I think it was literally just a sentencing deal.
Yeah.
She's pleading out to second-degree murder.
Impossible situation.
Oh, it's like the worst.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of people who say they would never plead guilty for something they didn't do, and I can see if there was prison time attached, not doing it. But then I wonder if they said you can plead out and get probation, would more people be willing to kind of put aside that, well, I didn't do it, but I'm not getting any prison time if I just plead out?
Yes.
I do wonder if more people would plead out with suspended sentences. I know a lot of people with drug charges just plead out on time served because they get locked up for 30 to 60 days waiting to get out waiting for their trial because they can't make bail, and they basically walk out of court because they just got time served.
I'm here to tell you that like the scenario that you're talking about exists and happens constantly. I have clients that plead out all the time, either for time served or straight probation, and they never do any jail time, but they're pleading out on a case that they're adamant that they didn't do the crime, but they're getting that offer of no jail time, and they're not willing to take the risk. They'd rather just plead out. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to tell you, even though it's a class 4 felony, which is the lowest felony in Illinois, I'm like, it's a life changer. It haunts you. It follows you around. You have to seriously consider this. And it's such a tough decision to make when you've got a situation where there is really no witness, and the facts that the theory that the state has developed, and they're running with it. It's like I say it constantly on my podcast. I'm like, the one thing I can tell you that's definitive is that the prosecutor wasn't there when the crime was committed. I wasn't there when the crime was committed, and the cops weren't there. All this is theories. No one knows for certain other than the actor and the decedent.
Yeah.
And that's it, so it's like, and in those types of situations, and with like this, where it's not a gun, it's not a knife, there is a plausible explanation as to how he could have like stumbled back and fallen through that window. And it's like, the science isn't going to help you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can't figure out in terms of which way he landed.
Right. And they did try. They tried to find an expert to say, if he landed this way, could he have fallen out backwards or face forward if he landed in a certain way? And they're like, for as far as he fell, he could have flipped around more than one. Like there's absolutely no way of telling.
So, what this case, Amber's case, reminds me exactly of a movie that I just watched, which is actually nominated for, and it won a few Oscars, I think, called Anatomy of a Fall. And it's a French film. It's kind of half in English and then half subtitled. Awesome movie. Like for any true crime lovers out there, in terms of kind of like the most authentic, one of the most authentic, like crime movies I've ever seen. It was
Mhm.
very similar to this. It was a husband and wife. Husband ends up falling to his death from a 3-story building. The only witness there is the son, their 11-year-old son, who's legally blind from an accident. But the way that the movie, like from the trial scenes over in France to it's outstanding, and it's super, super similar
Mhm.
to like when I was watching it, it made me think of our case because it's such a similar story.
Mm.
Because no
Yeah.
one really saw it, no one
Mhm.
really saw what transpired. The state was adamant, and but they dug deeper into the past and kind of their struggles that they were having as a couple, like very similar.
Mhm.
It's really good. I know you don't watch much TV, but you should watch that
I'll
movie. It's
add it to
really
my
good.
list of things that I'll try to get to.
It's very good. You'll thank me. You'll be like, you know what? I watched that. It was great.
Well, Amber was not gonna take any plea they offered her. This was going to trial. But I don't know, Bob, if you would agree with the statement. We've said it so many times that a case is won or lost before the trial when the judge decides what evidence the jury is even going to hear. And this is
100%.
one of those cases that I think it's pretty true.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was not allowed in was Josh's drug use because his tox screen at autopsy was clear. And so that meant he wasn't intoxicated in a way that would have contributed to the fall. So drug use was out. The judge was also inclined initially to leave all of the accusations of violence out of this because what mattered was what happened in the moment. And Amber was not presenting a battered spouse defense. She wasn't saying, because he hit me before, I was afraid he was going to do it again and I acted. This was straight self defense. So the previous violence wasn't relevant. But the state managed to get one thing in, and that was the restraining order that he had filed on Amber, but they never went to court for. And the reason they were allowed to have it in was because it was found in plain sight at the crime scene, and therefore it was part of the scene.
Oh my God.
So, in the written narrative portion of the restraining order, for anyone who's never filled one out, you got to write down why you want one. He outlined multiple instances of abuse from Amber towards him, all that happened while they were in Alaska.
But he did decline to write anything that he had done to her, though there are reports from Alaska about those instances, so we know that they happened. But Bob,
Yes.
how would you argue against the temporary restraining order being allowed?
Well, relevance. How is that relevant to the crime? Like how does that help a jury get to what happened in this particular scenario? And I've never heard of, because a document is in plain view that has little to no relation and is truly akin to, a criminal background coming into evidence under the theory that it was in plain view, so it was part of the crime scene. It's hard for me to answer that question because I've never heard of such a thing. It's
Yeah.
the most absurd ruling I've ever heard.
Yeah, allowing this in was very difficult because, like Eric pointed out, he didn't write down anything he did to Amber.
Mhm.
So, for this to be the only thing allowed in, it showed to the jury, it portrayed Amber to the jury as the primary aggressor the through everything. Whereas if it was shown as that they had I don't want to say mutually combative, but they had a relationship where they took turns being aggressors or would be aggressive with each other, they would like the jury may better understand their argument.
Mhm.
That's so massively prejudicial,
Mhm.
allowing that thing to come in like without background. Like if you're gonna let that in, you
You gotta
gotta
let
let
all
it
of it
all in.
in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to get to the truth here, you're gonna paint this woman as the aggressor in the relationship because the jury's, if that's all they're hearing, they're assuming that's all there is.
Right.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So yeah, that is incredibly prejudicial. It really is. Are you guys sure that they let, like, that was the grounds they let it in under? Did they
I'll
saw it
double
and
check and I'll
claimed
like
Hey,
I'll
I've never
re-record.
heard of such a thing.
I'll dub myself back in doing it if I'm wrong. That's what I have written down in my notes. I'll double check. But one of the things with this that I also think is strange is that it is a restraining order
Mhm.
application. It is not a restraining order. They didn't go to the hearing,
Exactly.
so it's all untested information. Any court filing is really just your side of the story. It's not that's all it is. And
Was it
so
filed though?
I don't
Had it been filed at
he
least?
filed it and then they didn't go to the hearing.
Okay, so they didn't show
Um
up, so it was dropped.
if I'm remembering correct, I will double check and then somehow fix it if if I'm wrong here. Um I'm pretty sure they were saying that it was out on top of his bag and they were because it was relevant to their argument that day.
I mean, that makes more
That's
sense.
my guess, is they're
Like that,
saying it
right,
was
she's got it in her hand. She's like, "You filed this bullshit against me," like, and just going
right,
at
or
him.
him saying, "I'm gonna go refile something on you."
Mhm.
So I think that's why it was allowed in because it was
That
in
makes
plain
a little
sight,
more sense at
and
least.
therefore it's a little bit it but there's I mean, Amber never said it came up, and obviously we don't have any other witnesses, so
And it was water under the bridge
Mhm.
at that
yeah,
point,
it was
maybe.
untested, like, his side, so it wasn't, like, tested in front of a judge. But
Right.
the judge allowed in something else that was I don't know, it kinda plays both sides. A lot of evidence will do that, depending on how you argue it, but in this case, it was the video of Amber talking to her grandmother, Gloria, in the police station. In some ways, I think it was helpful to her side because she is crying. She is distraught, and she is clearly not crying for herself. She repeatedly expressed a lot of concern for Josh and a lot of, like, just all the feelings you would feel if your actions, even unintentionally, led to somebody being hurt or killed. Her emotional response was very much on point,
Appropriate.
what you would
Yeah.
expect.
Mhm. Yeah.
100%, 100%. I mean, you'd feel awful,
Oh, yeah.
like you
Bother
said,
your
it's like
baby.
exactly, like, your intent is irrelevant if, like, anything that you did triggered the end result, no matter
Mhm.
what your intent is, you're gonna feel horrible. Like,
Yeah.
you would be saying the words, "I killed him," "I can't believe I
Mhm.
pushed
Mhm.
him through the window," no matter if it was him tripping, when you're in that moment in
Yeah.
time,
In shock.
you're not parsing your words, you're not speaking
Mhm.
carefully, you're speaking from your heart and your gut, and you're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe what I did," you know what I mean? It's like because the contact itself was enough to trigger whatever caused him to fall through the
Yeah.
window,
Yeah.
you know?
And she was talking to her grandmother.
Right.
Like, I mean, this is the person she felt safe with, and she was unloading on it.
And while that video helped Amber's case, there were some things that didn't really help her.
Mhm.
Like the sound bites of her saying that she killed Josh, didn't really sound too good to a jury.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying though, like, you're catching somebody in the moment,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know what I mean? And, like, because that was the paramedic or the fireman that walked up on her when she's
Yeah.
cradling him, right? That he
Yeah.
overhears her saying that, and what was she saying? "I pushed him through the window," or it
Yeah,
wasn't like
she said she pushed him. Here's what she didn't say that I think is important. She did not tell her grandmother on this recording that he put his hands on her first. She instead said something about Josh messing with the TV before the push.
Hmm.
So, she's not the story about him putting his hands on her first came later.
Mhm.
Yeah, see,
That definitely didn't help.
that doesn't help, especially when you're coming with the self-defense,
Yeah.
affirmative defense, because that requires that you were being attacked in order
Mhm,
to, you know, basically come back with the same amount of force that's being levied at you, and if that doesn't exist, at least
mhm.
initially, yeah, that's damaging, I
Mhm.
mean, but ugh, yeah, like, I don't know if I would've gone with that defense in light of that snafu with her statements being
Right.
contradictory, It's
Well,
tough.
the tape was not the whole conversation. For one, they didn't hit record on it as soon as they walked into the room. It was after the officer realized that they were talking that he went over there and hit that button. But also, there are chunks of this recording that were either missing or they were glitchy. And the state said that that was just tech issues, no worries. But of course, the defense is going to smell a rat when they get an incomplete and glitchy recording.
I smell a rat.
That is exactly how you would have said it to the judge. I'm sure.
That's right. Your Honor, I smell a rat. How convenient, Your Honor. The recording just happened to glitch out right when my client's giving exculpatory. Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that.
So the defense looked at this tape holistically and decided it was going to be a net loss for their case. So they wanted to get it kicked out and they asked it to be suppressed. The judge did not agree. How would you have argued, Bob, to get it kicked out?
I mean, it certainly would have been under the guise of that it was, a Fourth Amendment violation. That like I don't know the situation whether or not she had been read her rights at that point. I mean, she certainly.
She had so one argument that our attorneys did present was that her Miranda rights against answering questions kicked in after she said she wanted to wait until her attorney got there, and they're recording this conversation after. So her rights were read. She invoked her desire for an attorney, and they still recorded it.
Yeah, that's the argument right there. I mean, is there
But grandma's not an agent of the state.
right?
Is the other side.
Therein lies the rub. But it's still because they know, even though she's not an agent in the state, they know she's going to be having like a candid conversation with her grandmother, especially in the state of mind that she's in.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough, but like I could see the judge not kicking it, because of that whole agent of the state aspect of it, because technically they're not questioning her. She's talking voluntarily to her grandmother, just not realizing that she's being recorded.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Of course, they tried to argue right to privacy, but as we talked about before, you don't really have a reasonable expectation of privacy when you're sitting in a police interrogation room.
That's right.
That's the least private place you're ever going to be in.
That is, you have the least amount of expectation of privacy in that room, maybe than anywhere on the planet.
Yeah. So the video was in, and the defense was just going to make the best of it. Like I said, there were plenty of scenes in that video where Amber was incredibly distraught and says things that sound like she really did not mean for him to go through the window.
I mean, you've got to lean into that video and just be arguing context. You know, that anybody in that situation wherein they feel a responsibility, like deep down, like had I not pushed him, that little shove I gave him caused him to trip and then he falls. You know what I mean? You're going to feel that guilt. Like you're going to say, my God, I killed him. I caused his death.
Yeah.
It would have been better if she would have had the wherewithal to say, I ultimately caused his death. Oh my God, I ultimately caused his death.
Right.
As opposed to I killed him,
Who talks like that?
For no one.
Yeah.
Except for maybe me. Oh my Lord, I ultimately caused his death with that terrible thing that I did, but didn't mean to kill him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not my intent.
Yeah.
One of the things the state did that I always find interesting. So here in Missouri, it's always lesser included. So if you charge someone with first degree, the jury can always find for a lesser charge. Oklahoma is not that way. They have to instruct the jury for these lesser charges. So the state was going to try to prove second degree murder, but they added first degree manslaughter as a lesser included charge if the jury wanted to consider that. So we've already talked about the bulk of the state's case, that Amber pushed Josh, it wasn't self-defense, and it was reckless enough to meet the definition of second-degree murder. As for the defense, they had 3 key defense witnesses, and I'm going to let Eric tell us about them.
So one of the witnesses was Amber's grandmother, Gloria, who said that contrary to what the jury heard on the video of their conversation, Amber did tell her that Josh grabbed her. The officer didn't hit record as soon as they went into the room, and there were parts not recorded. And it was during that point that Amber mentioned it.
So, Bob, we know juries are just going to assume grandma is lying to say whatever needs to be said to save her grandchild. But as a defense attorney, this is one of your witnesses. How do you get over her credibility issue that has to be rattling around in the jurors' heads?
Well, I mean, that's the first thing I ask her. I mean, you have to broach that subject immediately and say, look, would you get on the stand here and would you lie on behalf of your granddaughter in order to get her acquitted? And her answer, of course, can be no. If my granddaughter had purposely pushed him to kill him, I wouldn't get up on the stand and lie. I mean, it's the only way you can counteract it,
Mhm.
really, in terms of you got to head it straight on and just go right at it and just get her talking so that because like in terms of credibility of witnesses, it's everything. It's like
Mhm.
what you're visually observing, how they're acting, are they touching their ears, doing all the things that people do when they're fidgeting, when they're lying, all those things, which may be bullshit, which or not, I mean, like people that think that they can figure people out based on their, their body movements and I'd hate to have somebody get convicted on that kind of it's definitely not science in my book, at least what I consider to be real, actual
Mhm.
science. But it's tough. Like it's not a great witness.
Mhm.
Anytime you have family or friends that are
Mhm.
testifying on your behalf, it's assume there's going to be bias there and they're going to say what they have to say to get you off. So I mean, that's the wart, that's the wart of that witness that you're going to have to deal with it, going in. But what's your alternative to not
Mhm.
ever testify?
Right.
She has to be able to testify to the things that weren't on the recording,
Right.
Mhm.
so you're just going to have to kind of deal with it.
So the defense also presented an expert who evaluated the glass for the window and said it was far below standards for an external window, particularly when we're talking about a high rise. So the defense was arguing here that Amber couldn't have been acting reckless disregard because she couldn't have foreseen the window shattering. It's
Mhm.
not like they were on the edge of a cliff and got in an argument and she shoved him. They were inside on the inside of a window.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the problem with that argument is that they had just thrown a laundry basket against the window in the bedroom and broke
Right.
the window.
Exactly.
So, like, the foreseeability aspect is it's not a great argument only because that unfortunate thing happened
Mhm.
Mhm.
minutes before. We're
Right.
like we know baskets, I'm assuming it's like your typical plastic basket
Mhm.
that without laundry in it probably weighs a few pounds.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't typically want to be living in a building where you could
Mhm.
break windows by
Right.
throwing something of not great weight against the window and it's shattering. I don't
Mhm.
know if the window just cracked in the bedroom. I don't know what the case is, but in terms of that it hurts the foreseeability argument in terms of her
Yeah.
saying, yeah, like the real argument is that she never thought that he was going to fall into the window.
Right.
Like whenever she put hands on him, like the last thing that she was intending was him to fall back into the window and then fall
Mhm.
through. You know, it's like once you kind of get sucked into the state's theory and you're arguing against it, like that, like I would have thought long and hard about that self-defense thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just it's one of those things where I mean, to me, it's just yeah, at most it should have only have been a manslaughter, like
Mhm.
it should never have been higher than a manslaughter, but I don't even think it was that. Like I just think it was but there's culpability, you put hands on somebody and something catastrophic happens, you're probably not walking away from it.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just kind of the fact of the matter, which I'm sure is why the attorney was like, "Look, you put hands on him." Like
Mhm.
our only defense to you putting hands on him is self-defense, because otherwise, whatever resulted from your actions in terms of that
Mhm.
battery, you're stuck with it. So yeah, it's a tough case, it really is.
Yeah. The third witness was Amber herself. She testified about some of the issues in their marriage, though she wasn't allowed to talk about all of it. During cross examination, the prosecution had Amber come down from the stand and demonstrate full force how she pushed Josh. They had a detective that was about Josh's size stand in for that. And when Amber tried to push him, she couldn't get him to stumble back the way she said that Josh did. This reinforced the state's narrative that Amber couldn't have pushed Josh if he was being the aggressor and was ready for it. She must have caught him off guard.
So Bob, what are your thoughts on courtroom demonstrations?
I'm not a fan of them, because you just can't, like, there you go. There's the perfect example.
Here are two of the
if
most famous ones.
if the glove don't fit, you must quit. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that glove with him making his hand all fat.
Letting the defendant handle evidence is
Oh
just
my,
I'm shocked by that. The other photo on the screen is, Kelly Sigler. She has a TV show now. She was a prosecutor. This is a famous, case where she was trying to show how a woman who was claiming her husband, battered her, killed her husband, and she did it by bringing in an entire bed, having her assistant DA lay down in the bed and get tied up, and she straddled him and demonstrated to the jury how the crime could have been committed.
I mean,
Two
like,
of the most shocking courtroom scenes I've ever seen. Especially you have one DA straddling another. It's always a good time in court.
that's a good time. That sounds like hot, clean fun in the courtroom. Yeah, like, it's different if the state's trying to use this, like, demonstrative evidence as opposed to you putting your defendant up there
Mhm.
and trying to recreate a scene that is going to be impossible to recreate.
Right.
To me, it's like one of those things where you, like, flip a coin and it does something, like, miraculous. You're like, "Oh my god, I could
Mhm.
do that 10,000 times, and I'd never be able to do that again." You're not going to be able to recreate exactly the situation that occurred. It's almost like a can't win situation because there's just no way to duplicate, especially because she probably wasn't really aware of everything that was going on, which ultimately, if we're assuming that she didn't push him and he's facing towards the window,
Right.
right? Like, if that's not the fact, if it was really some hand fighting and then her giving him a shove and whatever causes him to lose his balance, like, I'm gonna keep going back to that pillow. I don't know why that pillow was there, and it could be that that pillow wasn't tucked up in that corner but instead was on the ground,
Mhm.
and it looks like
Mhm.
a big chunky pillow.
Yeah.
If she got him enough to move a little bit, like, if he's not standing solid, ready to be, this cop, like, how is he standing? Like, it's not
Right.
just the size. Is he bracing for it? Or
Mhm.
is he pretending like, like he's not aware that she's coming? It's like trying to reproduce that is, to me, massively scary, because you
Yeah.
just can't recreate this, the situation. I often feel the same way about taking field trips to the crime scene,
Mhm.
because it's just, unless it's the exact same time of day, and you're just not gonna be able to, like, I just think it works against the defense when they do
Mhm.
that, honestly. Like,
Mhm.
I guess it kinda worked for Peterson, right? The one time, didn't
Mhm.
they bring on Michael Peterson? Like, didn't they bring them, the jury, to go look
Oh,
at the staircase? Do you guys
interesting. Yeah, I
remember?
don't probably. I mean, I can't remember. I know there's a case from the '80s where the jury went out to this mansion in Rhode Island to check out the crime scene, and I'm like, "I don't even understand why you need to be out here." Like,
Right.
what are you going to see? And it's not like the crime scene you're not investigating it.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of, courtroom demonstrations. It's a general
Yeah.
proposition.
So the jury, as we talked about, they have two options if they found her guilty and they could always find her not guilty. We talked about second degree murder. Now let's talk about first degree manslaughter in Oklahoma. And I always have to say the state because states kind of categorize things differently. I find that manslaughter is generally the same in any state, but I'll just say this: Oklahoma. Um, it is perpetrated without a design to affect death by a person while engaged in the commission of a misdemeanor. It is perpetrated without a design to affect death and in the heat of passion, but in a cruel and unusual manner or by means of a dangerous weapon or you're resisting a criminal attempt. So I think like number 2 there is what they're arguing as far as manslaughter, but the truth is nobody was arguing manslaughter. The defense is arguing not guilty, self-defense, and the state was arguing second degree. It was really just for the jury to argue amongst themselves if they thought she was culpable, what culpable is she? So let's assume you do believe she's culpable. Which one of the two fits in your minds?
You go first, Eric.
I think the second degree probably fits more in my mind, but I'm not a lawyer. I just that would be my gut reaction to it.
I would think that I think it would be first degree manslaughter with but I think it would be number 1, not number 2. Like
Okay.
I just don't think that she had the intent to hurt him. Like can you pull it up one more time so I can see it again?
Yeah. So
But,
it would be with
so
basically committing a misdemeanor,
right, which is
pushing TV
exactly, which is
could be the misdemeanor.
it's the battery, it's
Yeah.
the push. The push is the
Mhm.
battery, which results in a death.
See?
Like to me, that's exactly what happened.
You should have went first, Bob, because now I'm changing my mind.
Hey, that's what I'm good at. So, yeah. So I mean, because to me, that's a perfect fit when perpetrated without without a design to affect death by a person while engaged in the commission of a misdemeanor.
That does sound
So
like a battery.
Mhm.
it is right. That's definitely a
You
battery.
shove someone down and they hit their head,
Exactly. Any
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
that
that's what
stuff.
it sounds like.
Right. Yeah. So that would be the one that I would have argued. But when you're going with self defense, is like you're kind of eh, you're in a position as the defense attorney not to really to be able to argue that because you're claiming that you're not in the commission of any crime,
Mhm.
a
Right.
misdemeanor or anything else. That you were trying to fend him off. You gave him a shove, and down he went.
So the jury, however, disagreed and they found her guilty of second-degree murder, and
Whew.
Amber Hilberling was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Wow, man.
Now, she did appeal, and I think you're going to be interested on this appeal. One of the issues was prosecutorial misconduct. So at trial, I didn't mention one of the witnesses, but it was a jailhouse informant. Incentivized witnesses are Bob's favorite here. So
Yeah, snitch.
the informant testified that Amber laughed about killing Josh, indicated that she intentionally pushed him, and said something like, "I killed the bastard."
Wow.
Amber's attorney went and talked to the informant later after the trial, and she admitted she was actually high on meth when Amber allegedly made those statements. And so the prosecutor knew she was high at the time and may not be remembering what happened correctly. Obviously, meth is a drug that does alter memory and perception, especially about what was said and how it was said. But the prosecutor allegedly, according to the appeal, and according to what this informant told the defense attorney, told her not to tell anyone she was on meth at the time. So this appeal was
Hey,
denied.
listen, don't tell anybody you're on meth.
Yeah.
Okay? It's our secret.
Don't mention that in open court. Now, how much about, as an attorney, Bob, this is your expertise here, how much about an informant does the prosecutor have to disclose to the defense? Do they have to disclose everything they said or just the parts that they're going to be testifying to?
I mean, the problem is that you'll never know everything that they said. It's like, so theoretically, I can ask for everything that they said, but, I mean, the state, you like to think that they're honest, but they're not. I mean, they're out to get a conviction. So, with the jailhouse snitches, I mean, you're basically your route of attack is to say, look, they're incentivized. They got a deal out of this. They said whatever the hell the state needed them to say. It's like in terms of everything that they said, it depends. Is it a written statement? Is it a recorded statement? I mean, like, is it there where I can actually say, okay, well, we have to be able to play the whole tape, because like they're portraying, this person is something that they weren't at that time. They were clearly, under the influence of methamphetamines,
Yeah.
it's relevant. It's relevant to their perception and their memory, and the
Mhm.
jury deserves to hear it because it goes to the weight of the evidence. So, but if it's just a written statement like, oh yeah, I was in there with her and she said this and she said that, and they just happen to know that they were on meth because they probably had to do a drop, like a
Mhm.
urine drop, so they
Mhm.
knew that she had tested positive. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's a Brady violation. Like if they
Mhm.
didn't disclose that and I end up finding out after the fact, especially if they tested her
Mhm.
coming, which they typically do,
Mhm.
like I don't know what circumstances she was in, but I mean, like for all I know, she was in on a probation violation for
Right.
meth use,
Right.
and she
Mhm.
dropped dirty and she's in there because she had a dirty drop, I mean, it's that kind of stuff is the stuff that's just, it's dirty pool, and you're
Yeah.
kind of limited with it. But, fortunately, well, what happened with the appeal? Now you got me all like dying to know what
And the
happened.
the appeal did not it was denied,
Oh,
on all points. But the idea of the Brady violations is so interesting to me because you don't know what the state has, so you
exactly.
don't know when they're withholding something. And
Mhm.
there's a case I covered on Crime Lines out of Connecticut where the the prosecutor had literally in his desk a signed sworn statement by a police officer that he saw the defendant driving like not even near the crime scene at the time the murder happened. Basically,
Wow.
a state trooper passed a kid he knew, alibied him,
Yeah.
and the prosecutor never turned that over to the defense. And the way they found it is that prosecutor, the universe intervened apparently. He was out playing golf and dropped dead of a heart attack, like dead
Wow.
by the time he hit the ground.
Whoa.
New prosecutor comes in trying to get caught up on the cases, pulls that out of the drawer and
And turns it
realizes
over.
and turned it over and realized this literally kid, he was still in high school at the time, had been railroaded. I mean, the whole
Wow.
case it's a lot. It's a if anyone wants to hear, it's a Barbara Gibbons case. I covered it, I think, a year or 2 ago. The case is a lot, but it's like they don't know that that letter that the state trooper never went to the defense and said, "Oh, hey, by the way, I gave a
Right.
statement." Now
That's the thing about Brady. Like
you don't know what's there,
we
so you
can't, right? We can't know what we don't
nobody's
know.
policing it.
It's like the only time that you typically find out is way after the fact.
Right.
The only way that we can typically sniff it out before the damage is done is if I send my PI out
Mhm.
and they dig up some kind of like a witness that the police said that they didn't even talk to.
And they're
That
like, "Oh, no, I already told the police all this."
right.
Mhm.
Like that, like in those types of circumstances, you can sniff it out. But
Mhm.
if it's a situation where you don't sniff it out, I mean, like that's the thing. It's like you expect there's this honor system
Yeah.
in terms of, but like that's where that conflict of they're so driven by convictions in
Right,
terms of, yeah,
we have
it's
an
rough.
we have an adversarial system, but it's on the honors system. It doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense.
And it's adversarial to both the victim and the suspect.
It's adversarial.
Yes.
To
I mean, this
everyone.
Yeah.
prosecutors will tell you they don't represent the victims or the families, they represent the people.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's funny.
that's
Sorry.
yeah. And,
Sorry.
Eric's found out that they sometimes don't represent anyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they represent their own election.
Right.
That's pretty much it.
Right.
That's been
It's
my
very
experience
political. It's a
in
political
my
position.
advocacy work for my brother's case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead, start, Charlie. I'll shut up.
Yeah, so, that was the only appeal was the direct appeal. After that point on, in October of 2016, before any additional appeals could be filed, Amber Hilberling was found by another inmate dead in her prison cell, and her cause of death was asphyxiation, and the manner of death was ruled a suicide.
Wow. What a
Just
sad, sad ending to a sad, sad story.
it's
Yeah.
tragic. And Amber's
Man.
family believes that she was actually murdered by another inmate and that this murder of a high profile inmate was covered up which it's just like you said, a tragedy all around, particularly for Josh and Amber's son, who is being raised by family at this
Oh,
time.
man,
Yeah.
that's a sad, sad case, like all around.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
I feel like there's a lot here that we can learn about the system and about how trials occur, what our rights are, things
Yeah.
like that. There's a lot to learn here. So that's one of the reasons, I like presenting this case to people because it makes them think. It makes them think about intimate partner violence. It makes them think about what is self-defense, what is, what culpability do we have? What is reckless? There's a lot to think about here, but at the end of the day, like with so many cases we cover, we know that there are families on both sides just absolutely left devastated by what
Mm-hmm.
happened, regardless of what the verdict was.
yeah,
It's true.
yep. And everyone in this one is left devastated.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
Josh's family, Amber's family, their
Yeah.
son.
Mhm.
You know, yeah, it's brutal all around, and you know, like, and it just kind of goes to show you, you know, in a case like this where no one really knows what happened other than Amber,
Mm-hmm.
and if we believe her, you know, I mean, all of this was just not murder. You
Right.
know, it's like, I mean, if you can get caught up in the system, and if you've got a a law enforcement agency that is so inclined and a prosecutor who's
Mhm.
gonna back them up, I mean, you can go down on cases. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
it just happens, you know? It's like the misnomer that they always get the right person, or, you know, and it's what I'm always screaming and yelling about on my podcast, on
Yeah.
my soapbox. "Oh, you know, they weren't there, I wasn't there, the cops weren't there." It's all
Mm-hmm.
theory, you know, and it's scary, you know, it's scary, but, you know, I think maybe the moral of the story ultimately is keep your hands to yourself,
Right.
you know? I mean, is kinda like getting it down to brass tacks, like, you keep your hands to yourself, you're probably not gonna end up, you know, causing somebody's death, or, you know, whatever
Yeah.
the case may be, but, nonetheless, it's a sad, sad case. I forgot how sad I forgot about the suicide part of it,
Yeah.
yeah.
When we presented this at TCPF and we got to that point, because people were like, "Well, what happened next? What was there another appeal?" And I was like, "No, there wasn't. She took her own life." The room gasped. I mean, it was like
Mm-hmm.
just, whether her family does not believe she took her own life, but if we do, agree with the suicide, which obviously we don't know, we're not there, we're not privy
Right.
to those private records, but she did have a lot of guilt. I'm sure we saw in the interrogation, she felt really guilty for what she had contributed to, even though it was not her intent. And I do believe her that it wasn't her intent. I think this really does fit into manslaughter almost
Mm-hmm.
pretty perfectly. It's pretty much the perfect scenario, let's throw self-defense out. I I definitely think that this was more of a manslaughter case, and had she taken a deal, the state thought she could do 5 years and be released, but because she decided to go to trial, she
Right.
gets 25. And I have a
Trial
lot of
tax.
thoughts. I have a
Yeah.
lot of thoughts about punishing people for exercising the right to trial, which is what I believe it is. If you think
Mm-hmm.
she's safe enough to go back into society at 5 years, it should be 5 years whether she takes the deal, or it should be 5 years if she's found guilty at trial.
100%.
Um, I just do not understand what what the point of punishing people more because they exercise the right to go to trial. Do
Yeah,
not think that's fair.
it's the antithesis of what the Constitution stands for, really, and it's one of
Mm-hmm.
those things where, you know, the state's just got that power to be able to do it,
Mhm.
you know, and a lot of it boils down to the judge, though, you know, I mean, like, that's your saving grace in a situation like that where the judge is saying, "Okay," you know, because like, after she's convicted, then she has to go to sentencing. I'm
Right.
Mhm.
assuming that they did, you know, like a pre-sentence report on her and got background and history, and she talked to probation, and they said, "Well, yeah, we think, you know, we think X amount of years is a sufficient punishment." And, you know, when the state's coming in saying, "Okay, well, we want 25 on this thing," I
Mhm.
mean, then it's incumbent upon the judge who sat there during the trial and heard all the evidence to say,
Mhm.
well, I hear you state, but I'm not going that far on it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like, it's a shame. It's sad, but yeah, no, I obviously agree with you, Charlie, that that whole concept of punishing people for exercising their right to a trial is
Right.
insane to me, but it happens all the time. I mean, it's
Oh,
kind of,
absolutely.
it's like our system, you know.
Yeah.
We call it trial tax,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
That's what and it's a
That's
sad reality.
We have talked about a lot of issues, and I know our listeners may have some thoughts on them. I know sometimes I have some hot takes on criminal justice things that people don't always agree with, and Eric and I are always okay with being disagreed with. I don't know about Bob. He's a little sensitive.
No, yeah, I've got pretty
I'm
thick
kidding. You can
skin.
say
Yeah.
you can
Yeah,
say anything to Bob. He's
I'm
fine.
good. I'm good. Yeah, I've got thick skin. 20 years of getting beaten up in the system. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's and look, I mean, everyone's allowed to have their opinion on things, you
Mhm.
know,
Absolutely.
and just like we're allowed to have ours, you know.
Right.
And, like
Mhm.
I think I could say with great certainty that the three of us really always just kind of like want to gravitate towards justice and
Mhm.
equality. You know
Mhm.
what I
Yep.
mean? Like to me, like I'm never arguing other than I want equality and
Mhm.
just justice. And you know, like finding the truth in criminal cases is a very, very slippery critter to try to get your hands around. It's just
Yeah.
it's hard. It's the system we live with, you know. I mean, it's still the best in the world, but it's massively flawed. Massively flawed. I mean, Eric, you know,
Yeah.
you're living it, man. You've
I'm
been
living
living
it.
it for
I'm
As
living
decades.
it. Yeah.
as Eric always says, it's a legal system, not a justice system.
Indeed. Indeed.
Well, like you said, Charlie, if you want to get involved in this conversation, if you want to fight with us, go on social media.
We can
Uh,
use the engagement.
we definitely could. Go on social media, follow us at Crime Lines and Consequences. And if you want the small talk, don't forget about Patreon and Apple subscriptions. And with that, we'll see you next time.